Welcome back to another Kray video. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss any videos. And for people really into the Krays, join our private Facebook group, Krays Crime Lords of London, where you will find stuff probably unavailable anywhere else. We're an established group with a large membership, and best of all, we're friendly. The link is in the YouTube description section.
My name is Leonard Ernest Reed. I was known by everyone who knew me as Nipper Reed. I was born in Nottingham on the 31st of March in 1925. During my working life, I was a policeman and rose to the rank of Chief Superintendent of the Metropolitan Police's Murder Squad. I led the investigation into the arrest and eventual conviction of the Kray twins and their firm in 1968 and 1969. Away from my police work, my passion was boxing, and I became a boxing administrator, a position I held for many years. Here is my story. An interesting, but in the end, unsuccessful case was Bert Hannum's investigation in 1956 into the deaths of elderly ladies in Eastbourne, which resulted in the prosecution of local doctor John Bodkin Adams. Hannum had previously upset the chief crime reporter of the Daily Express, Percy Hoskins, over his handling of the Whiteway investigation. Hoskins had worked with Sir Peter Rawlinson, counsel for Whiteway, in the towpath case when Rawlinson, as young counsel, had read the papers for libel on behalf of Beaverbrook newspapers and believed that Hannum's investigation was at best unsavory. Now, backed by the Express, Hoskins took up Adams's cause with relish. Years later, when I was a senior officer and Percy had become a good friend of mine, I found time had not mellowed him on the subject of Bert. When I sang his praises, saying he was one of the truly great detectives, Hoskins was scathing in his denunciation. He was like a big chocolate Easter egg, he said, beautiful on the outside, but fuck all inside. The allegation against Adams was that he had administered fatal doses of morphine to elderly patients who had left him money or gifts in their wills. One difficulty faced by Hannum was that he had failed to find the medical records of the woman with whose death Adams was charged, and these were produced in a spectacular manner by the defense, changing the whole complexion of the case. Adams, who did not give evidence and was brilliantly defended by Geoffrey Lawrence, was acquitted, much to Hoskins' delight. Later, Percy told me that he was the only crime reporter supporting Adams's cause and that he had been personally seen by Lord Beaverbrook, who had warned him that he had better be right, or both he and the paper would be the laughingstock of Fleet Street. When the jury found Adams not guilty, Beaverbrook sent Hoskins a telegram reading, "2 were acquitted." Adams remained grateful to Hoskins for his support and left him £1,000 in his will, noting that he was one of the few people who had had faith in him. Hannum also seems to have upset the judge, Lord Devlin, who later wrote in his account of the trial that Suits, his nickname, had proved an adept manipulator of the press, apparently for his own glorification, rather than for any assistance which it could give to the investigation. So far as I am concerned, Bert Hannum was a gentleman. I am grateful to him for his attitude towards me when, as a fledgling CID officer, he taught me much that stood me in good stead throughout my career. That said, certainly Bert was not everyone's cup of tea. He smoked expensive cigars and spoke in a precise way with an affected accent. He also cultivated the acquaintanceship of the upper strata of society. These traits, coupled with his rather superior manner, did not endear him to his colleagues or find favor with senior officers, and throughout his later career, there was much jibing and sniping at him by people who were, in one way or another, jealous of him. Another thing which did not help his popularity was his investigation into corruption in the Met in 1955, which arose following allegations that a solicitor and a police sergeant from Savile Row had conspired to pervert the course of justice. Burt conducted the inquiry with the thoroughness and diligence which he brought to all his cases. In doing this, he did himself no favors and earned the contempt of some junior officers, but, more tragically, the distrust of some senior ones. This attitude, held especially by some of the top brass in the CID at the Yard, was a serious lack of judgment. I have long held the view that the troubles of the 1970s and 80s could have been avoided if complaints of corruption made in the 1950s had been more thoroughly examined. An investigation into corruption was almost universally resented, and there was a widely held view at senior level that the name of the force had to be protected, and that this was best done by having as little publicity as possible about such matters. Of course, the opposite was the case. The reputation of the force and the manner in which it was regarded by the public would have been much better served if corruption had been ruthlessly investigated and the offenders identified at the earliest possible stage. Instead, there was a pervading sense that the name of the force had to be protected at all costs. The officer who undertook the probe was immediately looked upon as an intruder, a rubber healer, and this, coupled with a policy of self-protection, served to color the attitude of some investigating officers. It was an unfortunate attitude which still persisted into the 1970s. In a blaze of publicity following allegations of corruption in the Times newspaper, Frank Williamson, Her Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary for Crime, was appointed as an advisor to oversee the internal investigation. Williamson, who had a reputation as an honest and painstaking detective, was seen as an intruder who, it was feared, would ensure that a positive rather than an inconsequential report was produced. His views on police corruption were well known, and he had stated at many detective training schools that until the words, "except police officers," were written into certain statutes, they must be dealt with in just the same way as any other offender. At the time of the inquiry, I was a chief superintendent at Scotland Yard, and Frank, a good friend of mine, would confide in me both the difficulties he was experiencing and the attitude of some of the top brass of the CID. It can be summed up quite readily. One day, he asked to see me, and I said, "I'll meet you at the Yard." "Good God," he said, "we can't do that, Nipper." And when asked why ever not, he said, "I'm persona non grata at the Yard." I was dumbfounded. Here was a man who had been a provincial chief constable and who was now an inspector of constabulary, whose presence in the Yard was being questioned. We had to meet in a pub, and there he expressed his concern at the quality and ability of officers seconded to his inquiry from the Yard, giving as an example Detective Chief Superintendent Bill Moody. Williamson's fears were fully justified. Even whilst engaged on the Times inquiry, Moody was taking vast sums of money from pornographers in the West End. He later received a sentence of 12 years imprisonment for his part in an extensive corruption racket. As a result of this attitude, investigations were normally little more than a whitewash. As far as the top brass was concerned, if one officer got into trouble, he was just a rotten apple who had already been picked out of the barrel. But any suggestion of widespread corruption was resisted because of the effect it would have on the force and public confidence. They wouldn't accept that there was deep-seated corruption or that it should be investigated properly. For a long time, the investigation was held in check on those grounds, which was ludicrous. It was only with the inquiries into the porn squad that it was finally accepted that corruption was established and had been going on for a long, long time. The production of these whitewash reports was the reason that the then Deputy Commissioner, Sir Robert Mark, was finally given the authority to create the A10 Division. During the Kray inquiry, I was approached by a detective inspector from the porn squad. It had become semi-public knowledge at the yard that I was busy in the West End. He came to me and said, "Gov, if any of my lads' names comes up, you'll let me know, won't you?" It was absolutely incredible that these people had come to believe they could walk on water. I didn't stay at Harlesden long, but the experience I gained was invaluable. I learned from all the CID officers there. Sid Coomer was my sergeant, and he too was a patient tutor. He taught me how to compile my reports and generally made sure I was pointed in the right direction. A self-effacing man, he had won a George Medal during the war, but never mentioned it. I only learned of it at his retirement party. Both Charlie Braybrook, the other detective constable, and Bill Britton, who had gone with me to buy furniture, were real characters. Bill was fond of a glass or two of gin and pep, and one morning after several too many glasses, he was at his desk, his head on his clenched fists, demanding perfect silence. When Hannam came in and asked if he was all right, Bill gave us all a lesson in quick thinking. "Perfectly, sir," he replied, "just doing a yoga exercise." After some 15 months, I was moved to Paddington, where I stayed for the next 7 years. It was an area of contrasts. There was a fairly big Irish element who lived in the little streets off the Harrow Road up towards Willesden and Harlesden, where there were 1 or 2 identifiable Irish pubs. But towards the south side it bordered on Hyde Park, and so you had luxurious flats and lovely squares such as Sussex Square. Sussex Gardens was a kind of dividing line. Eastbourne Terrace, Porchester Terrace, and so on were where the prostitutes were working round the station. And there was always the scandal that the church owned the property, and so it was considered tacitly encouraged prostitution. It was always busy because there was a permanent, definite criminal element in the area. Activity was generated by Paddington Station. There were always parcels and cases being nicked, and nearby Pride Street was famous for being a place where one was able to hock bent gear. There were 1 or 2 shops known throughout the locality and by the broader criminal underworld where you could get rid of a radio set, or the new toy of the time, the tape recorder, or things that had been nicked from cars. Then there was a famous place, the cider house on the corner of the Edgware Road and the Harrow Road, which sold nothing but raw cider. It was frequented by a predominantly Irish element and their girls. You would get the occasional stranger who wandered in there, and who, not knowing the score, would be picked up by one of the girls, taken round the corner into a quiet back alley, clobbered by the men and thus lose his wallet. This was a scam known as the Murphy game. The police station was past Paddington Green, where there was a statue of the actress Sarah Siddons. The station was almost on the corner of the Bishopsbridge Road. There were a couple of pubs opposite, one of which was one of the quaintest places you've ever seen and looked like an ordinary house. It might have had an indication in a window that it was a pub, but that was all. When you walked in, there was a series of doors leading to a tiny little bar and then a sitting room. As you looked through, there would be a man who seemed always to be eating something. His standard greeting was, "What do you want?" We, the police, chose that pub because we could be entirely on our own. He didn't even bother to draw the beer. We had to do that. If you called the landlord for a drink, he would reply, "I'm not getting up, serve your bloody self." It became almost like a club. If someone whom he didn't know came in, he would refuse to serve them. In a curious way, it was the same as the Krays when they took over pubs and would have only their friends in. How he existed, I'll never know. We used to joke that he only needed 1 barrel a year. Paddington was a good training ground. It was a real working police station. In a league table, I suppose it would have been on a par with Lehman Street, and then the next down would be West End Central in terms of activity, if not quality of crime. Paddington was always regarded as a stepping-off station. If you worked there, you were almost certain to get a promotion from whatever rank you were in. It was that sort of station. You were only sent there if it was thought you could do it, and in turn, you knew that having got there, you could guarantee promotion provided you didn't blot your copybook. When it came to it, in all, I served 11 years there, 7 as a detective constable and 4 as a first-class sergeant. It was an area I came to like because of the variety. There was St. Mary's Hospital, the canal, the station, 2 underground stations, and then there were people like Jack Spot living on the manor. It was a cosmopolitan area I found attractive. When I was first posted to Paddington, the detective inspector was a big Scotsman and former schoolmaster John McIlver, who years later said to me in his piping Highland twang, "Yes, young nipper, I may not have taught you much, but at least I taught you how to do a decent report." I'm not sure he did. All our reports were vetted by the detective inspector, and John still kept his schoolmasterly habit of going through them with a red pen. Once the report was slung back at us, we would have to retype it with the corrections and resubmit it. By the afternoon, when John had had a substantial and almost invariably liquid lunch, the report would come back once again with more red highlights. John had revised his revision. Ian Jock Forbes, who later became one of the best investigators on the murder squad and also the second national coordinator of the regional crime squads, was a sergeant there. He had an incredible memory, or at least gave the impression he had. When he went into an office, he would say, "Hello, Reed, or that's Jones, isn't it? How's your wife?" This was very impressive. Of course, he may have been cheating. John Bliss, who was the first coordinator, did. He told me he kept a little book, and if he was going to say Manchester, he would look at all the names, and when he arrived, would speak to the chief inspector, who would mark his card. Jock Forbes was a master at it, and he developed a wonderful rapport with his men. He was enormously helpful to me and other young officers. If you were in doubt about a case, you could go to him for help and guidance, which is so important for a young bloke. You can make some incredible boobs if you are left on your own. A lot of senior officers then assumed you knew what you were doing and didn't care if you didn't. In those days, investigations were much more difficult. I saw a program on television recently about an investigation, not a particularly big one, where a Holmes computer was in use. In those days, you did not have the benefit of a computer which you could ask, how many people named Smith have been interrogated? Or how many boats were colored blue? You had lists of people, descriptions, cars, car numbers, locations, and who had been seen in a location. The drill was that you, as the officer in the case, had to go through all these and either memorize or note that certain people were at certain places at certain times, extracting all the material you thought was important. In a big case, you would have a second or even third reader to extract information they thought was important. So there was a kind of fail-safe, but basically, the task of extracting all that information was yours. Tommy Butler, who later led the London end of the Great Train Robbery investigation, and who had a great reputation as a detective, was also at Paddington as a senior first-class sergeant. People had enormous affection for Tommy because, on the face of it, he was such a lovely man. He had a good sense of humor and a nice attitude. The police and detection were his only obsessions. As a detective, he was good, but he was also most frustrating. He was always helpful if your report was ill-defined or directed. In the old-fashioned way, he would say, "What a lot of bollocks," but he would then sit down and go through it with you sentence by sentence, helping you put it in order. But in one way, Tommy Butler was the worst detective I've ever come across. He was so secretive. He was a great investigator and plotted things up beautifully, but really opening up and having a conference saying, "Listen, chaps, this is what it's all about," would have been as alien as cutting his throat. He was obsessed by security. He would never tell his men what was happening where or when. He would say, "Come with me," rather than, "Come with me, I'm going to interrogate 3 blokes they've got at Paddington Station." If he was going to organize a raid, he would assemble his forces in the police station at, say, 6 a.m. But it would not be until they arrived at the actual house or premises that they discovered where they were going. Sometimes over the years, I have wondered whether it was I alone who thought this a failing, but I have asked around, and all have been in agreement that this was his great fault. Occasionally, he would join his team for a drink, but it was only occasionally. He was a very private man, and no one was ever really close to him. Unmarried, he lived with his mother, but home was really the CID office. If anyone ever tried to slope off home early, even after 14 hours of work, Tommy, a workaholic, would say derisory, "Another early night, then?" He spent every evening typing in his room upstairs at Paddington. Downstairs we could hear the tapping of the machine. No one knew what he was doing. It may have been that he was rewriting poorly compiled reports by the rest of us, but this can't have been every night. The only other thing I can think of is that he was putting together a diary with a view to compiling his memoirs, but none was ever published. Thank you for listening. That's all for this edition. I'll see you in the next one soon.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please join our Facebook group. It's called Krays Crime Lords of London. We're a friendly moderated group with over 1,000 Kray and other celebrated gangster videos available for view. There's also thousands of images in the photos sections. The link for the group is in the YouTube description section.